U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said if he were in the White House, Seoul would be paying 10 billion US dollars a year to station U.S. forces Korea in South Korea. Well, he will be back in the Oval Office next Monday. Now, what next for South Korea? Let's turn to Professor Mason Richey. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you for having me.
Let's start with where Trump's rather obsessive and aggressive take on defense cost sharing with countries around the world came from originally.
I think it comes from two places, really. The first of which is a long-standing belief by Trump that countries that are allies of the United States should essentially be financially more prone to paying the United States something in the effect of protection money, really. And that goes back to the 1980s, really. And in particular, this is the case, I think, with the Asian allies, although it's increasingly been the case with European allies, too, that he essentially thinks that those countries are taking advantage of the United States' security guarantees for them and also taking advantage of them financially. And so, one way to get around that in his head involves these types of burden sharing agreements. The second thing, is I think that Trump misunderstands fundamentally what alliances are about, and he doesn't see them as partnerships in which the United States also gets something positive out of it, but rather as an obligation or some type of responsibility that the United States takes on behalf of another country. And he thinks in that sense, other countries should therefore be responsible for paying the United States for this type of protection money.
Well, we have to talk about why Trump is targeting Seoul specifically. I mean, is he trying to take advantage of the situations here on the Korean Peninsula? What's your take on it?
So I think Seoul has a number of things going against it, or South Korea more generally has a number of things going against it. The first of which is a positive trade balance with the United States, which, as I mentioned, is something that has always irked Trump going back even to the 1980s. At the time, it was about Japan having a positive trade balance with the United States. So I think that's part of it. And as I said, he doesn't understand, or at least seemingly doesn't understand, the fact that the U.S.-South Korea alliance, like the other U.S. alliances, also provides positive benefits for the United States. So this is a long-standing set of beliefs that Trump has about alliances. They're not about order building, as far as he's concerned. They are highly transactional. And this is not something new in his thinking. And so I don't think that the way in which he's been aggressively communicating the way that he wants to take a harder line on South Korea has anything to do with South Korea's current vacuum in leadership and the current vulnerability and weakness in South Korean government. I think the interesting question will be to what extent the Trump administration has that weakness in South Korea on its radar and would choose to use that vacuum in leadership and that government and cabinet weakness here as a vulnerability that they could exploit in order to try to get a better deal out of South Korea, whether it be on the special measures agreement for host nation military support, or whether it be renegotiating the Korea's free trade agreement.
It is indeed a concern that South Korea is going through such a political turmoil ahead of the new U.S. leadership coming in. Now, does that mean he will not reignite the debate as soon as he takes office? Do you think it'll happen soon, or is it not one of his priorities?
So I think that the silver lining for South Korea on this is that the Trump 2.0 agenda includes quite a bit of obviously domestic-related issues. There are also a lot of other problems in the world right now that Trump is interested in, at least in principle, including the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right.
So there's a chance, I think, that simply because of the number of things that the Trump administration are going to be interested in doing domestically and internationally, that South Korea or the Korean Peninsula or even in some sense Northeast Asia more generally may not be the first thing that Trump turns to. I think the second thing is we have to remember at least normal administrations tend to come in and do a fairly substantive review of current policy.
Right.
And so there's, I think, built into the system normally several months worth of policy review. Of course, there will be some things that the Trump administration wants to roll out right away. But for a number of issues, there'll be policy reviews, and perhaps one of those is going to be the U.S.-South Korea alliance. And I think it's also worth pointing out that I think that some of his national security team and his foreign policy team are pretty big supporters of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and that's fairly widely shared. And so I think that some of those people are probably going to try to pump the brakes a little bit on trying to push South Korea too hard on the SMA, at least at first.
Well, then I have to ask you, is it safe to say that he won't scrap the defense cost sharing deal that South Korea and Washington sealed last November? Or will he at least try to use it as a leverage to get something else?
I don't think it's safe to say that he won't scrap it, but that's not, I think, the most likely option. I think that the most likely option is some type of renegotiated agreement. And I think that this time, perhaps even more so than in his first term, when, again, he made some very significant demands for increases from South Korea, is that the world is a more complex place. It's more interconnected than it was before. The risks, I think, are interconnected between theaters and between countries. And so I think that there's a greater sense in which the SMA might be connected to other issues, and there might be possibilities both on the U.S. side and on the South Korean side to use various elements of leverage that probably wouldn't have played in as much as before. So I think that we're probably going to get some type of renegotiation, and I think it's going to be fairly complex given the amount of elements of leverage that both sides can use to try to pressure the other.
Before I let you go, Professor Richey, what can or should South Korea do so that Trump doesn't see South Korea as an ATM and, increase pressure on Seoul to pay a greater share of defense costs?
Well, the best thing that they could have done would have been to avoid the martial law scenario and the government breakdown that's happened ever since December 3rd. But unfortunately, that horse has left the barn. The fact of the matter is that the current acting president and his cabinet have weakened leverage. And so in that sense, I think they're just going to have to hope that the Trump administration doesn't come in with very quickly with an enormous amount of pressure in this area, as well as in other areas in terms of the U.S.-South Korea relationship. Beyond that, I think the important thing that South Korea needs to remind the United States of, and I know that they've already done it and will probably continue to do it, is that South Korea is very valuable for the United States in its larger effort to contain China. This is very valuable real estate in Northeast Asia, where the United States has 28,500 troops on the ground. It is a very important partner with Japan and the trilateral relationship. And that's also important vis-a-vis China, which is a huge focus for the Trump administration. And currently, right now, South Korea is also the largest foreign direct investor into the United States. And that financial component, I think, will play to South Korea's advantage, too. So I think that they should hit on those talking points as much as they possibly can.
Alrighty. Professor Richey, thanks so much for sharing your insight with us this morning. You have a great day.
Great. Thanks. You have a great day also.